Kira and Bashir are flying back home after visiting a Bajoran colony through the wormhole. I suppose we could ask why making colonies on the other side of the galaxy is a priority when Bajor itself is still recovering from occupation, but maybe the provisional government thought spending resources on an isolated and presumably undefended settlement was a smart long-term plan. It's not like we had an entire species come through the wormhole only a few months back and tell us the place is very dangerous. You know, the one that Bajor told to sod off because they didn't have resources to spare. Anywho, Bashir's being an annoying git. Thankfully, the plot turns up to save Kira, with this week's being an unexpected technical boo-boo while entering the wormhole. They manage to get it under control, though both are a little dizzy. I'm sure it's nothing, and certainly unconnected to DS9 not being there when they leave the wormhole. Kira finds it back in orbit of Bajor, where it used to be. Maybe they've shunted it back to deal with an emergency of some kind. I guess we could ask the ship that's on its way over to meet us. A pair of Klingons pop over, weapons drawn, and act threatening, right up until they see Kira's face. That immediately makes them apologetic, and they meekly withdraw after explaining that they didn't know she was on board. To the station we go, where plain simple Garak, who's wearing cardigan military dress, is explaining to apologetic Klingon that Kira is an imposter. He's accommodating when Bashir asks where we are at least, telling us that we're on Terok Nor, the old cardigan name for the station. Kira's heard enough and thinks buggering off would be the smart course of action. This plan is prevented by the arrival of another Kira, and she's wearing skin-tight clothes and titty straps just to make sure you know she's evil. In case you hadn't figured it out yet, we're in the evil bastard universe. That's why a human who attempted to escape is being given over by evil Kira to plain evil Garak for torture. She doesn't want him killed though, just interrogated, so I guess that's something. Bashir's been sent to work and is meeting evil Odo. Said meeting involves getting slapped a lot until he learns his place, something evil O'Brien has already apparently learned, as he's here too. Kira's having a better time of things at least. There are benefits to being a copy of the person in charge. And another of those benefits is being treated to a lore dump. Evil Kira confirms we're in the Mirror universe, a place where writers can make different characters without having to hire new actors. The shenanigans of a certain Captain Kirk here a century ago have resulted in the evil Empire converting to peace. Hurrah and huzzah! A slight problem, though. The Mirror Universe Cardigans and Klingons thought having their own time in the spotlight would be a laugh, so formed the Alliance, one that kicked the ever-loving shit out of the organization formerly known as Evil Empire. Bajor was still getting stuff through occupation during this time, only by humans instead of Cardigans. We could ask why Terok Nor is here then instead of a human base, but let's ignore that for now. The downfall of the organization formerly known as Evil Empire meant freedom for the Bajorans, and they decided to join the Alliance too. That's why Evil Kira is in charge here. The backstory comes with another problem, though. Knowing that the Kirk incident is what bollocks things up for the last lot, the Alliance has standing orders to kill any more crossovers, just in case. Evil Kira doesn't much like the idea, especially after normal Kira starts sucking up to her. Bajor here is a real player after all. Perhaps normal Kira could learn some tips to take back home and change things there. She even manages to convince evil Kira to not murderize Bashir by playing to her ego. Normal Kira is given some quarters and the whole meeting ends peacefully, as long as you ignore the cardigan escort, of course. Normal Kira's having a look around, this time with a Klingon escort. Despite this, evil Kira called ahead and told evil Odo that normal Kira will be inspecting the place. Either that or normal Kira made the call and pretended. It's to speak to Bashir, of course, and mention of the name Kirk causes him to make the connection, saying he learned about it in the academy. I wonder if they'll still teach it after being told that his interference resulted in humanity's enslavement. Kirk's story involved teleporters, and Bashir thinks that might mean evil O'Brien can help. Normal O'Brien would be able to, as he was the teleport lad on the Enterprise, but assuming the one here can do the same feels like a bit of a stretch. Still, there's no harm in asking, so Bashir will do that, while normal Kira tries to see if there's anybody else who can help. Quark's bar is the next stop on her tour, perhaps reasoning that a mirror version would be generous and ethical. She's even getting somewhere with him, trying to organize access to a teleporter, when plain evil Garak arrives and accuses him of helping humans escape. I guess the interrogation was successful. Evil Quark, or possibly good Quark, tries to convince him that this is all a mistake. Attempting to grab a rifle and shoot him probably doesn't help the argument, and he's dragged away by guards. Plain Evil Garak laments the loss as a new face turns up with a group. It's Evil Cisco, and upon being told the bartender has been arrested, he laments the loss too, before climbing over the bar and handing out free drinks. Bashir's trying his luck with Evil O'Brien. It would appear everybody knows about Mirror Universe shenanigans, as he's not confused when Bashir starts talking about Good O'Brien and how they're mates. Taking that conversation straight into asking if he can fiddle a teleporter leaves Evil O'Brien believing that Bashir is just buttering him up. The conversation ends when Evil Odo tells Evil O'Brien that Evil Cisco wants to see him. Evil Cisco's busy dicking around with normal Kira, during which we learn that he was given a ship and a crew because Evil Kira found him entertaining. That he uses the ship to gather tribute from passing vessels probably doesn't hurt either. Evil O'Brien arrives and, after establishing that he thinks Evil Cisco is a bit of an arsehole, is sent to repair his ship. Evil Cisco himself is also called away, Evil Kira wanting a word with him. Normal Kira joins them shortly thereafter, though Evil Cisco leaves as she arrives. From his behaviour, it would seem he does not care for Evil Kira as much as he could, though that's possibly just a dislike of being ordered. His departure leaves Evil Kira free to ask Normal Kira why she wanted Good Quark to organise teleporter access. If she'd just asked Evil Kira, she'd have learned that their teleporters were changed after the Kirk incident to make sure it couldn't happen again. Speaking of Good Quark, he's brought in and admits that he pitied the humans he helped free. Evil Kira understands his position. That's why she's granting him a quick death. As he's dragged out screaming, Evil Kira has already moved on. There's a party tonight, and she wants Normal Kira to attend it with her. Normal Kira enters her quarters with a dress and is complimented on it by Plain Evil Garak. He's not here just to comment on tailoring, but rather to let Normal Kira know that her counterpart is entirely too enamoured with her to let her go. Who better to understand the rigours of your life than a copy of yourself? Plain Evil Garak, on the other hand, is entirely willing to free her. All she has to do is take part in his plan to replace Evil Kira with her, then hand power over to him after a little while. He's even willing to throw Bashir in with the deal, or have Evil Odo make him disappear if she refuses. Sounds like a good time to get the fuck out of Dodge, and she visits Bashir to let him know he's in danger. There's no plan beyond get ready to scarp her, so at least that means there's only one part to go wrong. Let's complicate it then by involving Evil Cisco. Normal Kira thinks he'll be interested in helping them get to their mega shuttle in exchange for data on how to save Evil Kira's life. It's not a great exchange from his point of view, and he tries to go back to sleep instead. Normal Kira's attempts to convince him that he's just as much a slave as the people under Evil Odo don't go anywhere, and she leaves. Perhaps things will improve at the party. Plain Evil Garak's here too, as are quite a few Klingons. A bit of a Barney between one of them and a member of Evil Cisco's crew fizzles out when Evil Cisco motions for him to stand down. It's all a bit tense then when Evil Kira joins them, wearing the same dress as Normal Kira, so she orders some jolly music and begins the celebration. Bashir's not been invited, his night instead being filled with harassment from Evil Odo. Maybe if he'd been doing his job supervising instead, there wouldn't be some minor kabooms, followed by an alarm. Bashir takes the opportunity to nab a weapon during the confusion. Evil Odo's attempt to stop him doesn't go so well, and the resulting shot turns him into a moist explosion, while Bashir legs it. We have alarms and pursuers, so a diversion into the conduits is wise. The other end opens onto Evil O'Brien fiddling with a gizmo. Bashir asks for directions to his megashuttle, and after calling Evil O'Brien a scumbag coward for not helping him and insulting every human in this universe, Evil O'Brien has a change of heart and tells him. It's not entirely altruism, though, as Evil O'Brien wants to go with them. Bashir agrees, and they start their joint bid for freedom. It lasts for several seconds, a group of Klingons immediately capturing them. Evil Kira does not enjoy having her party ruined, and her mood isn't improved by learning Evil Odo is now a puddle. Plain Evil Garak is told he'll be torturing Bashir to death in public shortly, then she turns her attention to Evil O'Brien. When asked why he did it, he gives a speech about anything being better than what they have here. It's a speech listened to intently by Evil Cisco, which might be why he and his crew intervene when Plain Evil Garak tries to take the prisoners away. They all back out and shoot the door, sealing everybody else in, as long as they don't remember the door on the upper level, or the existence of teleporters. Looks like nobody's thought of those though, so we're all making our escape to a docking bay. Evil Cisco declines an offer to follow us back to our universe, which is probably just as well, and Evil O'Brien now wants to join Evil Cisco's crew, so it looks like we're not taking him either. Onto the mega shuttle we go, and Scarpa towards the wormhole. The technical oopsie that brought us here in the first place hasn't been fixed yet, so assuming that's actually what did it, we have a way back. And a new way of visiting in the future, I guess, assuming the wormhole aliens are okay with it. A Klingon ship pooping at them doesn't stop them from reaching the wormhole, and the mega shuttle flies into it, so I guess the Mirror Universe people know about that now too. I wonder if the Alliance will fare any better against what's on the other side. Up in Ops on our station, Cisco is asking after a missing mega shuttle. They figured out something went wrong but not found debris, so are searching. The wormhole makes their search irrelevant when it opens up and spits out Kira and Bashir. Cisco calls to ask what the bloody hell happened, and has the good grace not to mention Kira being out of uniform, so we'll leave them to be debriefed about the whole thing until the next adventure. Right, let's get the rant out of the way first, the problem with evil Kira. We're using the tired combination of sex and evil, the implication that a woman can only be powerful through seduction. By associating the two, we're suggesting evil Kira could not have achieved her current status without the sexualization, and that's a shame, as a cold and militaristic evil Kira would have avoided those tropes and been more in keeping with the known history of the character. The Kira we know is a soldier who's done some real bad shit. Playing that up would have provided the nemesis we need and given normal Kira something to think about. The evil Kira we were given instead is defined by an arse-gripping wet-look bodysuit and bondage gear harness, all accentuated by her movements and mannerisms. It's a fascinating mix of misogyny and puritanism when you step back and look at it objectively. The idea that overt sexuality is a negative to be represented as such, coming from the same people dictating that increase in sexualized wardrobe and behavior in the first place. It has the stench of Rick Berman on it, just as sexualizing Kez in the Voyager episode Warlord smelled of him too. Looking at it from a purely professional point of view, if the only way to make your good women characters evil is to tighten their clothes, then, frankly, you're just a hack. To the story, then, and I've broken with tradition on this one. When there's an episode that follows a plot from a different series, I usually ignore that and judge things on their own merits. This one, however, details how the last conclusion went completely to shit, so it was worth the excursion, and I watched Mirror Mirror from the original series. Taking an ostensibly positive outcome, that of Kirk convincing evil Spock to turn the Empire into a place of enlightened altruism, and making it be the basis for their downfall is a pretty brave choice. When you add that the original action was also technically a Prime Directive violation, you get something that could be the topic of a whole video on its own. This channel's been on record previously for wanting to see the unintended consequences of Starfleet pissing on its principal rule. It's why I rate the Voyager episode Hope and Fear so highly. Janeway is forced to confront the extermination of a whole species as an indirect result of her actions. It's a shame, then, that we entirely ignore the questions raised by this episode. That's understandable to an extent, as the focus of the story is Kira, so she wouldn't much care about the whole deal. That Bashir has nothing to say is far more curious. A Starfleet Golden Boy having no opinion at all on the situation doesn't really fit. As a result, we miss the chance to examine things and perhaps argue that their own actions are an attempt to redress the impact of Kirk. The problem with that is there's not much you could cut from this one to make room. The ending feels rushed as it is, so trying to jam a discussion about the ethics of interference in there too would exacerbate the problem. There's a fair argument to be made for this story being worth giving the two-parter treatment, something that might have been even more warranted when you take the above-average production costs into account. The time and effort of changing many existing sets might have made more sense, spread over the budget of 2 episodes. That extension would have given us time to look at things in more detail to address some of the questions raised. Spending more time in the Mirror Universe could also have injected some political stakes. Evil Kira tells us that leaving normal Kira alive would piss off the rest of the Alliance, but we don't hear a thing about it afterwards. A longer story then could have given us more room to show evil Kira pushing back against Alliance members calling for normal Kira's execution, as well as providing some plausible deniability for plain evil Garak's attempt to overthrow her leadership. Newcomers to the channel listening to all of this could easily come away with the conclusion that I didn't like the episode. That's not true. What we got wasn't bad besides some character decisions I've mentioned. Those who've been here for a while, though, might have noticed a pattern. These little rants I go on are usually reserved for episodes that are good, but could have been great. In this instance, that's not because it did much wrong, but rather because it had the legs to go much further. There's a saying in entertainment, the source of which is a subject of debate, that goes, always leave them wanting more. By that measure, this episode is a resounding success. Personally, I'd argue there's a difference between having space for more and still being hungry. End of episode.
This travel brochure we've been hired to research, what do they need exactly?
It's pretty comprehensive. They want to know about all the features and attractions here, restaurants and the like. They're particularly interested in whether we have a swimming pool and, if so, how many people would fit into it if they took out the water.
Bit of a weird question.
Maybe they like foam parties or something.
Okay, that makes sense. Anything else we need to get for them?
Well, there's a bit here about defensive capabilities. They want to know how well armed and shielded the station is.
They're just trying to make sure any visitors here will be well protected. Nice of them, really, when you think about it.
What considerate organizers. I'm sure they have good reasons for wanting Cisco's command codes too.
Well, you know what Cisco's like. Any adventure around here and he's the one leading the charge. They'll just be wanting to make sure the next in line can take over quickly if anything goes wrong.
This is an entirely reasonable conclusion, and certainly no cause for concern. Providing this data to complete strangers will definitely not create any issues in the future. Woof.